Signore e signori, cari amici, buonasera. I think you can do much better than that. Buonasera. Oh, the walls must come tumbling down when you say buonasera. Thank you. Thank you for being with us at these, what we call the Dante Marathon. How many authors in the history of literature in the world do you know that could resist to a marathon like this? 6 hours on a Friday afternoon in New York. Very, very few. You're in for a treat. We conceived it as a marathon, or as I was saying before to my colleagues, it's like a Greek Orthodox Mass. How many of you have been to one? You know, they tend to last 6, 7 hours, but both the faithful and the people and the priest can go out, have a coffee, come back, listen to another piece, and then go out again. So we conceived it as such, and I hope you come with the same spirit. So we'll provide a coffee break after the first installment of the film, and then there is going to be the second half of the film, and then a reception, and then a panel discussion with 2 of the actors that are also going to stage a little dialogue between Dante and his teacher, Brunetto Latini. We have a fantastic lineup of people. We have the director of the documentary, Ric Burns, here with us, and we are happy to provide a live audience for him. We have the author who basically wrote the documentary, Professor Riccardo Bruscagli from the University of Florence. We have the 2 actors, Antonio Fazzini and Nicholson, that played Dante and Brunetto Latini in the film. And we have Heather Webb from Yale University, and here from New York University Department of Italian Studies and Casa Italiana Zerilli-marimò, we have Stefano Caredda, and of course my colleague Alison Cornish, one of the most distinguished scholars of Dante in America, and right now president of the Dante Society of America. So you cannot miss any part of this marathon, but we will be tolerant if you come and go, okay? So without further ado, I'm asking you to enjoy the film, enjoy the panel, the receptions, the break, and the occasion that you have to talk to each other and to these fantastic people that are here with us today about Dante. I remind you that we have overflow space on the second floor. It's a very large screen. The quality of the screening is going to be the same level that we have here, and it's an excellent quality, let me tell you, and I hope Rick agrees. So enjoy, and I will see you during the break. Thank you.
All right, buonasera. Ah, bravi. Very well trained by Stefano Albertini. So, all right, thanks for, there's a bit of shifting around. Thank you all for being here. Did you like the show? So thanks to Casa Italiana, thanks to Steeplechase Productions. We managed to gather some people here. Some had to take a subway, and some people had to take a train, and some people came on an airplane. So they came here for you, to be here live, to interact with you about this, this cultural event, which is this Dante Inferno to Paradiso, directed by Ric Burns, who is here with us. And so I thought I would introduce everybody briefly. This is Ric Burns, an award-winning documentary filmmaker, best known for his 8-part series on the history of New York. Over the past 30 years, he has explored the complex dynamics of the American experience from the Donner Party and the Pilgrims through his most recent films, Oliver Sacks, His Own Life, and Driving While Black. And then other mind behind this film is Riccardo Bruscagli, who's right here on my left. And Riccardo Bruscagli is Professor Emeritus of Italian Literature at the University of Florence, whose scholarly work has focused on the Renaissance, on authors such as Boiardo, Ariosto, Tasso, Guicciardini, but has recently turned, as you can see, intensely to Dante. He has taught at a number of institutions of higher learning also here in the US, including Columbia, Barnard, Dartmouth, Berkeley, and even NYU, but maybe in Florence, not in New York, is that right?
Not in New York, yeah,
Not in
in
New York, in NYU Florence. Okay, who else do we have here? We have Dante's here. So Antonio Fazzini is a stage, television, and film actor. He's Florentine. He collaborates with the Teatro delle Donne di Firenze and various other things. Before becoming Dante, he did something similar in the film Wondrous Boccaccio. You might have seen Maraviglioso Boccaccio, directed by the Taviani brothers in 2015. We have another actor who is Eric Nicholson, who actually is straddling the divide between actors and professors, because he teaches at NYU Florence and has written and thought much about literature as well as acting it out. And then we have Professor Heather Webb, who is, it said that she was at the University of Cambridge in the film. You may remember that, but she has recently transferred to the US of A, up the road, Yale University. So we're very happy to have her with us. And helping me get the conversation started is Fabio Carredda, who is a filmmaker in his own right. He just completed a film which is in its post-production phase in Italy, and he is also a graduate student, doctoral student here in the Department of Italian Studies at NYU, and I'm Alison Cornish. I teach here, and yes, and I'm the current president of the Dante Society of America. The Dante Society of America appears in the film, as you saw. Yes, we're glad to see that. And so, Fabio, do you want to make a film question to begin with?
Oh,
would
yeah,
you?
yeah,
Okay, all right.
So,
Do you
okay,
have a-
start. I have many questions.
Many questions.
So I don't know if we will have time to. Well, I will ask the first one. It's the most simplest. Like, it's the simplest one. So, Inferno is typically described as a regno senza luce. Purgatorio is surrounded by natural lights, and Paradiso is characterized by natural light. In terms of film photography, how have you treated this sort of climax of light, from darkness to intellectual enlightenment, ending with the vision of God?
Thank you for asking such a simple question to begin with. You know, I think two things about the film, Fabio. One is that, as Mark Twain said in another context, and I'll paraphrase it, if I'd had more time, this film would have been shorter. Which it's actually, that's the first thing, and that's a lie. The second is that, you know, we could have made it longer. But some limitations are useful, even if particularly the directors kick against those limitations ferociously. You know, we didn't have, nor did we want a budget to do sort of extravagant reenactments or kind of like CGI spectacular things. And so I think our intent was, with respect to your question, to give a sense, to some degree visually and to some degree by what the narrator says and what the extraordinary scholars, I have to just say, just this amazing cohort of people who, including Heather and Riccardo here, who really kind of lifted the film from the inside out. And so that, you know, you'd want to understand Hell, Inferno, with respect to the fact that it's not this flaming hot place, it's dark, it's timeless, it's eternal, and at the bottom there's a kind of entropic, you know, sort of climax or anticlimax, in which there's now the absence of heat, the absence of love, the absence of energy, and I think that we wanted people to be able to sort of create in their own minds what that meant and the degree to which it might challenge assumptions they had about what Inferno or what hell might be in an American or an English tradition. And I think similarly, without sort of belaboring this too much, the same for Purgatory and for Paradiso, so that, you know, you were kind of outside in Purgatory in a way that you were not in either the timelessness of hell or the spheres of heaven and on to the Empyrean. And again, people would say, oh, you know, it's about luminosity and the only figures you can really see are in the sphere of the moon, and then after that, the only figures you really see are Dante and Beatrice. And so I think there's a lot of imagination in terms of what the audience can do based on the material that is being provided by the film. Its look and feel, its rhythm, the ideas and the feelings and the relationship and the narratives that are being, and for us, what we wanted to do is intertwine, and now I'll stop, 3 narratives in the film: the story of Dante's life, the story that's told inside the Divine Comedy, and to some degree in the Vita Nuova, the kind of precursor text. And then what we called the story of the text, which is, where the hell did this thing come from? How was it, what were its, you know, antecedents? How did Dante conceive of it? How did it unfold, and what's been its legacy over time? And those are the kind of the 3 things we wanted to braid together. Now, with respect to your question, Fabio, I'm just going to insist that Riccardo answer it.
Well, Riccardo answers, you know, at the beginning of this adventure, because it has been really an adventure, I entered this adventure having no experience, naturally, of anything concerning films. And I thought it would be very simple. You know, gather intelligent people, and these intelligent people in front of the camera say intelligent things, and then you add some good images and music, and the movie is made. And it didn't go this way. And there were so many components, and there were so many aspects that I didn't expect. And about the light, yes, images. How many images we have amassed through all these years. But seeing the movie once again tonight, I realize how incredibly sophisticated the work in the editing room has been, because I tell you, I mean, somebody complimented us about the iconography, which is beautiful. But naturally now, if you just digit canto quinto images, you have all the iconography in the world for that canto. What I was even surprised by seeing the movie again is the manipulation of those images and the light. And I think the way in the movie, truly you have the impression of the obscurity and darkness of Inferno, and then the strike of genius of choosing the Carrara marbles, for Purgatory, that kind of a very cold kind of light, and then all the play with light in Paradise. So this is something that for me was unexpected and really moving scene. And maybe I can ask, or we could ask the audience, if you think that we succeeded or not in proposing that change of mood of light as a spiritual mood from one part of the comedy to the other. But another thing is also the light and the treatment of light during the biography of Dante. The way once again, the exile of Dante, those shots about the exile of Dante in the country, in the countryside. I think the melancholy of that passage of Dante's life is so incredibly moving and really rendered in such an affectionate way. And that scholar participating in this adventure could not expect and could not.
Let me just say, Alan Cox is here. Alan, where are you? Alan Cox, who is our narrator. He's also Boccaccio, and he also is sort of voicing Dante through a lot of the dialogic situations in the poem are incredible Antonio Fazzini. And of course, you could look at Antonio for hour after hour after hour, and I'm just sort of astonished. It's 90% of the images of the poem are of Antonio, and it's just mind-boggling. But, Alan, I love you so much, and what you've brought to this is so incredible. I don't know if Buddy Squires is here. Buddy was here, and he's one of our 2 cinematographers, along with an astonishing sort of South African English cinematographer, Tim Craig. And between the 2 of them, they just, I just can't even begin to tell you what they brought to it. Not here as well as Brian Keane, who did the music for it, and somebody I've had the good fortune of working with since 1989. So I just wanted to say that the film's made out of music and images and incredible intelligence, and on the part of Riccardo and Heather Webb and so many others, but that's where I want to leave it.
All right. On the topic of intelligence, so one of the things that I really like about this movie is that I can't remember another movie where Dante professors have starring roles. so that was my favorite part, and particularly when Heather Webb is teaching Beatrice. I really like that part. And so I'll address my question to Heather. So you have published a book recently about Dante really as a visual artist, right? Dante and gesture. And I wanted to know whether, your part in making and viewing this film, maybe now as a finished product, you know Dante very well, but did this experience or seeing the film reveal to you anything about Dante or about the Divine Comedy that hadn't been revealed to you before?
That's a wonderful question. I think it was really revealing to see the film after all the work we did together, because it's funny to play a role in it in the sense of I had really extended conversations with Ric, and it was under very strange circumstances. It was during the pandemic, and most things were still shut down, and I was sort of whisked across from Cambridge to London, where there was a space that had been rented, and Ric appeared in a virtual way to me, in fact, on a laptop screen that a very patient person held kind of at face height, so it was like we could have a conversation. You remember this incredible strangeness we all lived through in the pandemic, right? But I think what came through nonetheless, even with all the weirdness of that day, we had really, really, really prolonged conversation about everything we could think of in Dante. And then, of course, having Tori come in and talk with us and read through scenes, the kind of gestural intelligence she brings to the role of Beatrice was something that really struck me, right? Because as we were reading through the text, I was so struck by the way she was able to move with the lines and to, with her glance to convey so much with a smile, et cetera, et cetera. So it was wonderful. I think something else I really appreciate about the film was the way in which it also staged the work that we all do with Dante, right? So it showed the actors working, right? So the scene of me speaking with Tori is just one of them, but also there was a scene with Dante looking at his lines and thinking about his first encounters with the poet, et cetera, and then all the work with the illustrations as well in the film, and sort of showing the multiple different ways in which we all engage with the poem, I think was so revealing in so many ways to see this put together as sort of a long series of conversations. I mean, in many ways, it showed me how important each of those conversations are for thinking through the poem, how none of us do it alone. In every case, working through the poem, it has to be a conversation, and so I loved the way the film showed that and made that visible. Ric, you even appeared momentarily, right? Most of the time, because Ric asked all the best questions. That's what was cut largely from the film, were the really great questions Ric was asking. But I love the moment where you did appear really, really briefly, because I think to pay tribute to the way in which we all work with Dante through those conversations, I think was really, really crucial. But I think one other thing that I really wanted to call out that for me was revelatory, I mean, Il Bel San Giovanni, the time spent in the baptistry, I think was so crucial. I think, you know, if you want to convey something of Dante, you know, I think you set yourself this tremendous task, right? If you're going to convey something of Dante to maybe somebody who's not ever read Dante, right? What do you do? And I think spending all that time in the baptistry of San Giovanni and the way the camera took us around that space in repeated ways at different points in the film, to me was this touchstone, right, of what was so important to Dante and what really locates the whole journey and the whole thing. All three lines that you identified there in your film, they all were anchored, I think, in the space of the baptistry. So, I don't know, that's many different lines in response to your question, Alison, but I think there's much to be gained from the way in which the film takes us into the spaces that are dear to Dante, and the way in which the film stages the kinds of conversations and the kind of work and the kind of love that the poem engenders in people who work with it, and that was really visible in the film. So.
About the baptistry, naturally so much was edited out in the movie. And there was the beautiful passage that we actually excluded at the end when the priest was talking about the beautiful passage about the fire and about, remember, he mentioned the fact that not only every kid in Florence was baptized in the baptistry, but after the ceremony of the sacrament, the naked body of the remember the babies was put on the ground of the baptistry in the round of Porfido. I don't know how to say in English. Porphyry. Yeah, Porphyry, because it was really at the point of physical. The physical touching of that baby's skin with the marble of the ancient. Was the baby's bottom. Yeah. Okay. Whatever. If you say so. And it was a very moving passage also because it reinforced what he says in the movie. But just to say that you have seen a lot of beautiful things in the movie, but a lot of also beautiful things were discarded on the floor of the editing room, and inevitably.
Maybe I'll ask a question to Eric, because as I said before, you straddle the, you're an actor, but you're also a teacher of literature, and so what was your experience? What did this experience reveal to you about Dante in particular, about this poem? You know, you all may know that, you know, in the history of cinema, the Dante's Inferno is a very first full-length feature film with special effects. Was Dante in 1911. So yeah, what thoughts do you have about how Dante can or cannot be acted out?
Yes, thanks for the question. First, I want to say thank you for this opportunity again to Ric Burns and Riccardo, and to be a part of this amazing experience. And I've taught Dante for a couple of decades now. My specialty really is Shakespeare too, so there was humbling and fantastic opportunity to expand on that. And in particular, the scene I did with Antonio Brunetto Latini, for just to take that example, but so many others that we saw, like Manfred as well, Manfredi, from the critic's perspective and learning from my students, of course, and how they feel about this at a human level. And I think that, to answer your question really directly, Alison, is, and what Riccardo says so well about our lives matter, the humanity of Dante. And that's what the difference was, because no longer when you act the role are you trying to convey the complexities, this ambivalence that the canto is famous for, 15 of Inferno with Brunetto, but you have to inhabit that person, embody it, and it changes so much. And I've gone through this with Shakespeare, where I direct the plays, teach, write about them, but then when I'm playing a character like Claudius, I have to really feel so differently. I mean, this guy's a famous villain and all that, but I start to look at Hamlet as this insufferable, that guy, right? And so similarly with Brunetto, you start to understand him from this perspective of his, and this mix that's maybe not there on the level when you're analyzing the literature, the literary values, the poetry and the rest, that here he is. And the makeup artists, by the way, were incredible, transforming me and feeling this in this castle, right? So on a cold February day on the eve of the pandemic. And suddenly it changes everything. So now I'm feeling this mix of emotions. I'm so excited to see my star student, but I'm so embarrassed about my state, and he's going to find, right? He sees me down there, and how do I communicate? I love this student. But I'm feeling this shame. I'm here. How do I get all those opposites across? And it's you just forget about all the brilliant criticism from wonderful scholars like Heather, and all that I've learned in teaching Dante, to drain that out. And then doing that, diseducation. It's a diseducational process. It's like lethe, right? I have to forget the criticism. I have to forget what I've taught about Dante. I have to take the energy I've had from my wonderful students, and when they talk about these characters in a contemporary way, and then redo that because I'm in the body of Brunetto. Does that make sense? I'm trying to find that voice, and Rick had us go through these various rehearsals, takes, and each time there was a different level. And feeling a strange mix because it was, as I said, a very cold February day, half naked, but we were in front of this raging fireplace, and so that helped because Brunetto's all about these opposites and ambivalences, but you don't think about that. You've got to feel it, and you're going to connect. And Antonio was so great to work with because just the energy between us, and each time I think it reached a deeper level. So that's the difference. Paradoxically maybe, is to unlearn so much, especially if you've been teaching this material for so many years and reading essays about it, and that's the vita nuova. It becomes a new life through interpretation like this in a space that's real, right? In a time that's now, and that's a gift, and so thank you. I hope that clarifies something. Yeah.
Thank you, Eric, for what you did was just astonishing. And thank you for sliding slimed with makeup across a cold marble floor to sort of like chat a little bit with Antonio.
Yeah, all worth it, every second. Yeah. Thank you.
That notion of the here and now. I love it when Dante's walking around in modern Florence and buses are going by and bicycles and tourists and Dante, whatever. So I really like that. That really just sort of made it like that Dante is walking around with us all the time. So why should we be surprised? Yeah. So I wanted to ask Antonio, because you said, I think in the film, you said, well, I've known Dante since I was born. I drank it with the water of the Arno and so on. And whether this experience of making the film, did it teach you anything new about Dante? Is it a different Dante now that you know because of this experience?
First of all, I'm very nervous. I have to speak English here in New York because I'm Italian, Well, thank you for this question. Well, it's been an experience because when you study Dante through translation, it's incredible, but some passages that you take for granted that you understand in Italian and you know in depth in Italian, when you read them in translation, they're somehow clearer. And so I learned a lot about this in translations. And also this experience has been very important for me. And of course, after this experience, I feel surely a better actor, but also a better person.
I think
Giusto.
your life matters, I think is.
Thank you.
I mean, you have to.
Asked
I
by
mean,
yours.
Antonio, I would just, if I could just jump in and just say, you know, somebody was saying, you know, it looks like the statue in the Piazza Santa Croce climbed down and became you. And, you know, but beyond that, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for this, for your patience, but more than that, for this indescribable actorly ability to, when the moment comes, and Eric, you were talking about this, and I'm so grateful to you as well, when the moment comes, just to be there and to inhabit it. And it's really, I mean, it's like in that respect, there's so much about your performance which is like a silent movie and kind of brings full circle the fact that the first full-length Italian film in 1911 was Inferno, which we took and manipulated. And now here's this remarkable acting job. So I just want to just applaud you as, you know, as deeply as I possibly can.
So Fabio and I have more questions, and these people are good at talking, but I thought I would give an opportunity for those of you who've come and sat here. And I think microphones can be brought around to, go ahead.
I'll just speak? Okay. I unfortunately have two questions. The first one is, during this film, obviously, and during the whole Paradiso, the inspiration for Dante is Beatrice. Now, nowhere does Virgin Mary appear in this. Didn't, at the time when this was published, didn't that seem somewhat heretical, that the inspiration wasn't a religious figure, it was a secular figure?
They cut Virgin Mary out. She's there.
She's there, okay. All right. Jesus Christ. Okay.
Sorry.
And my second question is, when the last 13 cantos, with this story from Boccaccio that Giovanni Alighieri discovered them through a dream, is there any evidence, or was there ever any thought that they were not written by Dante?
Well, we have evidence that the sons of Dante, who were in their own right kind of poets, had the temptation of completing the Divine Comedy when they couldn't find those cantos, and fortunately they didn't do it. So no, I think you are not the only one, the first one who poses that question. But if in that family somebody else had been able to write those last 13 cantos, Madonna, what a family! So
Well,
we know that the sons, out of desperation, kind of had the idea. But truly, there is no. I don't know if somebody's a different question, different answers.
Also, a very brief comment that just occurred to me. I'm hogging this. The Inferno, it's a misnomer, because in Inferno, the fires of hell, people go to hell, fire and brimstone. And in fact, in the Inferno, the absence of warmth is really the worst part of hell. So
Yeah,
it isn't an Inferno at all.
Well,
it's a misnomer.
the Towering Inferno was the movie. No, but the Inferno just means the lower place. That's all that means. And yes, you're right. The surprise is that it's very cold in hell. There was another question.
I will be brief. First, I want to compliment the academic myself. I want to compliment the scholars portion. I loved that. I loved the production values, the visuals. I have some criticism, but there's no point in going into it unless I ask this particular question, because I've been sitting here for 4 hours. Is this planned as a feature film for 4 hours, because then I have a critique, or is this going to be a series on television? That would make a difference about parts I thought were a little too long and whatever. Can you answer
When we
that?
show The Sopranos in its entirety, you'll be sitting
I
here
never
longer.
watched The Sopranos. I
Yeah,
never
it's-
watched it.
This was broadcast last spring on 2 nights in a row, 2 episodes, and it was kind of, I make films for public TV. And so, it doesn't mean that we don't have theatrical ambitions. And I do, particularly with this film, and also with the film we did about Oliver Sacks, which was actually had theatrical distribution, but had the unhappy reality was that it was meant to start going around the country in theaters in May 2020. So so much for that. But so the idea that it would be each 2 hours, one night after another. I mean, we could have done, at times, Riccardo and I thought of 6 hours. I would have been happy doing that. But it was a hard sell in a way to PBS. Here's this, which I find really lamentable. I mean, that, come on, this is a public broadcasting system. Here is one of 2 names universally recognized, Shakespeare, Dante, and not in that order. And there's a reason for that. And they just couldn't, they couldn't see their way to 6 hours. But it was never intended to be consumed in the way that Alison Cornish has forced us to be consume it. But what I want to say is I think it was a brilliant freaking idea. And I loved every minute of it, standing up and back, and it was because we were able to see it as one story. I mean, that was the thing, which I really, really appreciate.
Yes. So good evening, everyone. I have one question and an observation. So the question I have is a question of language used during the production of the documentary. That since Dante is an important Italian figure, I found a bit bizarre almost that there are so many English spoken throughout the entire documentary. Though I understand this documentary is going to be on the American platform of PBS, and it tends to reach out to American audience. So, however, I still think that perhaps we could have more like Italian when we recite the passages from Dante's work.
With all respect, I couldn't disagree with you more. The whole point of the film was to take Dante's work and bring it into English. For an English-speaking audience who've heard of Dante, possibly heard of the Divine Comedy, think of that as synonymous with something called Inferno. And so when Riccardo started this project, I like to blame that on him and his extraordinary partner, Christine Herring, who's here. Chris, could you stand up? The whole point was to do this in English, to bring this text into the English, and to contribute to the kind of centrifugal work and power, which is like, I'm going to do this in the vernacular. Well, now English is the vernacular of the 21st century in many ways, with Spanish and other languages, but it is one of the global vernacular languages. And the idea that, there's a statue of Dante near the end in a not very good kind of looking cinematic effect. And that was me with my iPhone filming Dante standing in front of the Lincoln Center, and nobody knows it's Dante there. But I love this idea that it's kind of spread. He's sort of, kind of spread around the world, spread across the Atlantic. And so, we have like a few lines, nel mezzo del cammin de nostra vita, et cetera, and the last lines, and a few times when Antonio is sort of like dumbstruck in that most beautiful way, reciting with his eyes closed. But the whole point was, we didn't go into it, and I wish we had terza rima, and this extraordinary form he found. That's something that's on the cutting room floor. I'd love to like reanimate. But having said that, the whole point was to bring it into the hearts of people who spoke English in a way that might not have been the case before they watched the film.
Well, if I can add just one second, that it has been naturally strange for me, being an Italian and a Florentine, to enter this experience. And something that also Antonio said, because when you translate, naturally, you lose something. You lose the language, you lose the musicality of the language, and Dante wrote something expressly against this, against the possibility of keeping the music in translation. But you also gain a lot, because you get out of your bubble, even of some sort of pride, of bias. I mean, I'm Italian. Dante belongs to me. I have been breathing Dante and knowing Dante since I was in asilo. What do they want? They think that, but instead it's a very humbling experience, because yes, these people didn't breathe Dante the way you did. So what? You have to be able to find a way of communicating and sharing what you eventually know, and be open to what the others reveal to you. So in this operation, which is not just a translation in the sense of a literal translation into another language, word after word, but it's a translation into another culture, into another horizon of expectation, into another set of questions.
And another medium.
Yeah, another medium. And yes, my wife, Christine, was kind of instrumental for me, as usual, just forcing me into seeing things from another point of view. So exit from your Italianness, well, whatever, and try to enter into another mentality, and see what happens there, and see what the things that you never thought of come out, and see what the question that the others. Because, for us, for Italians, Dante doesn't need justification. Dante is taken for granted. Yeah, right. But instead, try to translate Dante, to explain Dante, and the importance of Dante for people who don't take Dante for granted at all. So for them, it has to become interesting, and how you do it. And so, bravo.
Yeah, I was explaining this to some Italians recently. I said, you don't understand. We have to sell Dante. It's not obvious. It's not obvious. But once people get into it, they really do. And I would say one thing about translation, because I think you called it a translation, I think, Rick, didn't you? That what you're doing is a kind of translation project. And I think I would disagree with you that English is the new vernacular. What English is the new global language. And one of the things to remember about Dante writing in his native language, in the language of his mother and his nurse, and it was an extremely local language. And so although we like to say that he was expanding his audience, in some ways he was kind of limiting the audience. Absolutely. And that is one of the reasons why I believe, against many people, that Dante sort of knew with a certain poignancy, because the music does get broken, that he had written something important enough that it was going to have to be translated. So I think he expected that.
The film was, to me, opened up a whole other door of existential angst. And in one of the images you had was these people in hell carrying boulders on their back. And it made me think of Sisyphus. And then when you mentioned that there were 13 cantos were missing, I really saw the Sisyphean boulder falling down. And I'm just wondering, Rick, was this your Sisyphus? Was this your... and your relationship to Dante?
I feel, of the many projects I've been, fortunate enough to work on, this was the hardest and the most important. I felt that, from the beginning, when Jane Morrow, who's here, and is a friend of Bonnie Lefebvre, who's a producer in the film and has his Jane, that it was, that was in 2016. So it took us the better part of, like 8 years to make the film. And I get why that was the case. It was really, it was absolutely a boulder worth shouldering and carrying. And it was not carried by Bonnie or Jane or me alone, but by really an extraordinary cadre of people. And, all the films I've been privileged to do are, thank you for your question, are, involve scholarly participation. In this case, it's a film that kind of like originated out of a team of scholars with Riccardo at the center, but Lino Pertole and Heather Webb and many, many others who just, just mind-boggling in what they bring, but also in what they want to share. And how to sort of craft a narrative which wasn't hopefully tedious and was worked like a film. Because there are these filmic elements to Dante. It's narrative, as film is helplessly narrative. It's incredibly visual, as people have pointed out for centuries, that it's not just written in the vernacular Florentine, it's written in a much wider vernacular, which is something you can see. T.S. Eliot made this point really, by no means alone, but brilliantly, more than 100 years ago, that in that vernacular of seeing, things come alive in a way. And so in a way, it was like shooting fish in a barrel, because it's, you want to see it. It's alive as it's something that's seen in the course of it. And so in that respect, as killing as it was continuously inspirational because of the people involved at every level, and what they gave. The actors, the time we had in Florence was just, the multiple times was incredible.
Over here on the other side.
Sorry, thanks. So I just had a quick question. I think kind of follows the conversation that we had until this point. I'm here. So, I think that on the one hand, you have the idea of divulgating work that is very important, but also on one side, you have the constant problem of celebrating in a sense of glorifying someone that can be sort of problematic in a certain sense. And I say this because since you talked about the film of 1911, which is a great film, and I had the chance of doing a film score for that film. And at the end, in that project, we sort of encountered a problem, which is that we wanted to make a music that was great, and celebrating the fact that Virgil and Dante are, finally going to purgatory, like exiting hell. But then at the very end of the 1911 film, you have the statue of Dante in Trento that is looking at the Austrian side or German side, and, kind of in a celebrating way, but extreme, right? So, and I think about this also as a PhD student in general, like I'm not talking just about this film, and it's a constant problem. Like, where is the limit, how, from divulgating to someone that doesn't know Dante, which is something very important and that I think we should always try to do, translation or not, I think doesn't matter, but how do we deal, and how did you think about this sometime problem of celebrating, glorifying, and also thus distancing ourselves from Dante, when we make him too big?
Heather, would you answer that question?
Yeah, fair enough. Dante's been taken up, translated, co-opted in a million ways over the years, right? And some of the ways in which he's been co-opted have been really unpleasant ones. There is, when we start thinking about his high genius, right? We start imagining we start imagining all kinds of things, and he can become, I mean, Dante can become a figure of almost anything, and we've seen him twisted in different kinds of political ways. I think this film took a very positive read, a very kind of read of the ways in which Dante's been taken up for liberating causes, thinking about causes of liberation, et cetera, et cetera. And Dante has been taken up in those ways, but we can't forget how Dante was also like taken up by fascists, et cetera, et cetera. So these are the specters I think you're alluding to, right? And you know, again, there's a long, I really admired the way in which the film wanted to take up the reception history and was constantly thinking the reception history of Dante, and that was actually one of the three main threads of the film. And you're right, it's an incredibly complex one. And I think all we can do is, you know, embrace the difficulty, and there's lots of difficulty there. But I think, you know, when there's the question of like Dante the persona and what he gets transformed into, and there's also what's in the poem. I think the way in which the text of the poem was insisted on in the film is very helpful to remember the kind of the complexity of thought that Dante operates, because the complexity of thought that he employs in the poem does not in fact lend itself very well to these kinds of ideologies in the end, right? Dante's a complex and nuanced thinker. And so every time he's twisted to one cause, it's never quite right with the poem, right? So I think coming back to the fine grain of the text, and I think the film really sought to do that, reminds us that it's up to us how we take up the poem. We need to take responsibility for how we're taking up the persona and the poem. So I think you raise a really, really vital question. And I think it's one that the film considered in various different ways, but it's one we have to keep considering, of course. I don't know if I fully answered your question, but those are my first reflections on your point there.
I might add, especially as the film lingered a lot on Dante, on Dante the man, right? And Antonio did it, right? And so, I mean, I think you did try to integrate biography with the thing that takes us to Dante, which is this literary artifact, let's call it, masterpiece. So to glorify, I mean, is it to glorify a person? Is it to glorify a biography? Is it to glorify, you know, this man who was born in this certain place? Or is it to investigate, you know, a work of literature in one of a zillion ways you could? And is that celebration, or is that just feeding on what's been offered? And so anyway, there were some questions over here.
About this side, or yeah. The gentleman in the third row next. Yeah. No, go ahead.
Oh.
And then
yeah.
And then this
been with this gentleman has been with you for a long time.
Yes. So. For this Jewish-Italian boy who grew up in Brooklyn and then transmigrated to Asian spirituality, what I wanted to say
Welcome
is
to
that
America.
My whole life was sort of was in this film, you know, from going through the essential Christianity to, by the time you get to Paradiso, the universal spirituality is what you know moved me so much, and I just wondered if anybody on the stage had a sense of how in the Paradiso the universal spirituality that speaks to the 21st century, it's so beautiful.
Thank you. I think that's true.
Not more of a observation than a
Thank
question.
you. All right, we're going to go here, and then we're going to go here, and then. All right.
Briefly.
Yes.
It was so great you included Emerson. He's key, and what you just said was there already in the 19th century, transcendental. And Ralph, you know, who is our father in many ways, along with Walt and Emily, the three of them. You know, he said it already, that Dante's universal, and yeah, that I think really speaks to what you just commented on appropriately. Grazie.
Yeah, a few things. Oh, sorry. Yes, okay, first, a couple of comments and my question. one comment. The moment in Purgatory where he looks down at the earth and sees it from a distance, I was just waiting to see whether you could resist intercutting Earthrise, the photograph of the Earth that became famous from the moon, because the feeling he is communicating is exactly the feeling that was communicated by the astronauts as they took that picture. It's a human feeling of something that humans have never experienced 700 years apart. I thought that was astonishing.
We're going to recut it. And I think that's a really, I mean, we thought
about Kubrick, too.
We did actually think
in terms of your goals, here's one person that was fairly ignorant of Dante, and you reached me, and enough that we're already talking about going home and watching it again to get the nuances. And
Bravo.
Bravi. I wish you'd had that extra 2 hours.
All right.
But my question.
The book is actually better. So I do have to say that.
My question about, glorifying. Dante, if I understood, and I don't know exactly chronologically, but there was a statement that he made that I want to say something about Beatrice that's never been said of a woman before. That's a profound statement. Leave aside, some of the gendering issues that we're aware of. I mean, the point is, I guess my question is, that's what he was glorifying, something he was glorifying. And do you think he accomplished that? And if so, what was it he said? I do see parallels to Plato's Symposium and climbing the ladder via love. But leaving that aside, what was Dante's specific statement in this regard?
Want me to take that? Well, the Virgin Mary ended up on the cutting room floor, and God is ineffable. So Beatrice takes her place. I mean, that was represented in the film, and looks up, and so she is not actually the ultimate goal. She is the vehicle, the pointer, and so forth. That's what I would say. What would you say?
Well, there's this there's an obvious analogy between the prayer to Beatrice, because he said "così orai," so that was my prayer to Beatrice in the moment I was saying farewell, and the prayer to the Virgin Mary who ended up on the floor. So it's true that Beatrice is not the final point of glorification, absolutely. But she's almost there. I mean, the analogy between the two prayers is really incredibly moving. And so in both cases, though, what is surprising is that the final approach is female, it's feminine. One of the most perturbing things in the paradise is that you never see Jesus Christ. You just in the cross, like an instant, and with the triumph. But you never see it. And the fact that the Virgin Mary in the last canto, this is, I don't know, Heather, what do you think of it? But the fact that the traditional iconography, even the iconography of that canto, always shows the Virgin Mary in glory together with Jesus Christ. And instead, she's alone at the end of paradise. So really, and then there is Beatrice, and then there's the Virgin Mary by herself without her son, and then there is the rose, which naturally is a female symbol. So the final approach of salvation is really profoundly feminine if you put together all these elements. I don't think I'm exaggerating. I asked for some.
All right.
Didn't make the film
Okay.
about this kind of sequence of female.
Oh yeah,
is how Virgil got to Dante.
The chain.
Oh,
Your,
yeah,
chain
yeah.
your chain was cut.
Yeah, I mean, that line that was said in Italian as well, another little bit that was said in Italian, amor mi mosse, love moved me, that Beatrice says, right? That is reported by Virgil when he comes to help Dante in the Dark Wood, right? So it's the Virgin Mary who sends Lucy, who sends Beatrice, but Beatrice is the one who explains this dynamic of love that is motion. So it's how to get out of this situation where Dante is stuck. He's in this crisis. He's in despair. He's unable to move forward. And so Beatrice represents and shows, and not just represents, but shows this movement of love and how that is that can save. And Dante presents her already. He starts to hint that she's a Christ-like figure. And she becomes ever more so in the Commedia. So the really amazing way in which he presents her, when he writes about her as no woman had ever been written about before, she's not the passive, silent, as Matteo Barolini said in the film, and has written about beautifully, she's not the passive, silent lady in the love lyric who is beautiful and gets looked at. She speaks non-stop in the poem, starting at the end of Purgatorio when she's scolding him, and then all through Paradiso, she explains, she teaches, and she shows, right? So there's this description of how her body shows this kind of the love of God and this motion that all the blessed souls are engaged in, and she's kind of a revelation of the divine, but in the very truest way. So that's where what Dante does with the figure of Beatrice is something that absolutely had never been conferred on a woman before, not just making her authority who teaches and speaks and preaches, right, which was certainly not allowed at the time, but also someone who shows forth the true nature of the divine. And so there's a lot going on with his depiction of Beatrice, and he certainly does, I think, live up to his promise in that respect.
All right, I'm going to moderate because I'm the moderator. There's a couple of, your dessert is coming. In fact, in the form of a lot of food that we hope you'll eat. But first we have to have a gentleman who's waited this whole time. One last question, yes? Yes. And then we have a couple treats before we get to go eat, so don't get up and run.
Well, a couple of fighters. I'm a nuclear physicist. I grew in an Italian household where Dante was quoted at the dinner table repeatedly. And I took Frechero's course at Cornell. My comment here is the discussion in the movie, to me, is an incredible parallel with the movie Oppenheimer. Because basically, the degree of scholarship and the influence of thought and the influence of how actually Dante changed the world and Oppenheimer changed the world is to what degree is it possible to recast the film in a way that it would have an access to a broader audience and it can be actually done in 2.5 hours.
Okay, thank you for that. One more question. Well, all right, we're gonna, yeah, because we have another little film clip, and we have a live performance, and then we have food. So if you want all those things to happen, okay.
Well, the Divine Comedy is such a rich poem, and being so rich, it lends itself to different interpretations. I wonder if the scholars got together to ensure a coherent reading of the poem. I felt that Barolini was certainly an outlier, in that for her, I think the Divine Comedy is much more than a spiritual journey.
Well, yeah, I think, no, I don't think they got together and agreed. I think, yeah. Yeah.
No, that was our intention from the very beginning. Actually, somebody, we won't say who, observed this is not my Dante. This movie does not reflect my Dante. And yes, because it was not intended to reflect anybody's particular Dante. We tried to assemble different brains and the common denominator was the sophistication and the bravura of those brains, and not that they agreed on Dante, which would be impossible anyway. And the territory of Dantistica is a very perilous territory, and since time immemorial. No, but really, I mean, it was never our intention to create a critical discourse, coherent discourse of Dante, putting together scholars who could, you know, be on the same page. They are on different pages. I don't think contradictory pages in general, but certainly it was not the intention of imparting a lesson on Dante according to consensus, general consensus, which would be impossible anyway, or to the opinion of just one scholar.
All right. Well, so we're going to clear the stage so that we can see the little clip, and thank our panelists.
Già eravam dalla selva rimossi, tanto ch'io non avrei visto dov'era, perch'io indietro rivolto mi fossi, quando incontrammo d'anime una schiera che venian lungo l'argine, e ciascuna ci riguardava come suol da sera guardar uno altro sotto nuova luna. Essi ver noi aguzzavan le ciglia, come il vecchio sartor fa nella cruna. Così, adocchiato da cotal famiglia, fui conosciuto da un che mi prese per lo lembo e gridò: «Qual maraviglia!» E io, quando il suo braccio da me distese, ficcai gli occhi per lo cotto aspetto, sì che il viso abbruciato non difese la conoscenza sua al mio intelletto, e chinando la mano alla sua faccia risposi: «Siete voi qui, Ser Brunetto?» E quelli:
«Oh figlio mio, non ti dispiace se Brunetto Latino un poco teco ritorni indietro a lasciar andar la traccia».
E io dissi lui: «Quanto posso, ven prego, e se volete che con voi m'asseggia, farò, se piace a costui che vos seco».
«Oh figliol»,
disse,
«qual di questa greggia s'arresta appunto, giace poi 100 anni senza arrustarsi quando il fuoco il freggia. Però va oltre, io ti verrò a panni e poi rigiugnerò la mia masnada che va piangendo i suoi eterni danni».
Io non osava scender della strada per andar par di lui, ma il capo chino teneva con uom con reverente vada. E cominciò:
«Qual fortuna o destino, anzi l'ultimo dì, qua giù ti mena? E chi è questi che mostra il cammino?»
«Lassù di sopra, in la vita serena», risposi io a lui, «mi sbarrii in una valle, avanti che l'età mia fosse piena. Pur ieri mattina le volsi le spalle, questi m'apparve, tornando io in quella, e riducemi a ca per questo calle. Ed egli a me:
«Se tu segui tua stella, non puoi fallire a glorioso porto, se ben m'accorsi nella vita bella. E se io non fossi sì per tempo morto, veggendo il cielo a te così benigno, dato t'avrei all'opera conforto».
Antonio Fazzini.
Brunetto Latini.
Dante, in carne ed ossa. Adesso se andiamo a mangiare, bere. Alison Cornish, our host, thank you all of you.